and welcome to the Goalkeepers Union podcast. Me, Joe Forrest, and Matt Beadle, and of course Richard Lee. If you want to get in touch, please do so. It's at GK Union on Twitter, at GK Union Official on Instagram, search GK Union on Facebook, or you can drop us an email, hello@goalkeepersunion.net. Our guest this week has 41 caps for England. He played for Leeds, Spurs, Blackburn and Burnley. Paul Robinson, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the Goalkeepers Union podcast. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Yourself?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you. Very, very excited to have you on, as I'm sure listeners can probably tell. Paul, let's talk obviously about your career, and let's talk about the starting point. You were very, very young when you came through at Leeds, weren't you? What was that experience like for you?
I was lucky, actually, to be fair. Goalkeepers obviously don't get the chance till they're older, as we all very well know. I was fortunate to be a part of a very successful Leeds youth team, and I was given the chance in the first team due to injuries. Nigel Martyn, who at the time I was cleaning his boots, I think, he suffered an injury, and I was the number 3 goalkeeper. And Mark Beanie, the number 2 goalkeeper, the week that he suffered the same injury, I think it was the Thursday before the game on the Saturday, he ruptured his Achilles. Oh. So David O'Leary's hand was kind of forced, and it was, you ain't got any other options, you've got to play him.
You mentioned, obviously, Nigel Martyn. You stepped in at Leeds, take over from Nigel Martyn. He was a huge character in the game. Did you feel any pressure stepping in for him, and how much did Nigel Martyn help you in terms of your career?
Do you know what? He's been one of the biggest influences on my career, other than my family, my parents and everything else. He came from Crystal Palace at the same time that I was an apprentice at Leeds. I went from cleaning his boots to taking his job. And he never changed as a person. He was absolutely brilliant from day one. He kind of mentored me as a kid, looked after me, helped me in training, and when roles reversed, he was exactly the same. Yeah, you could see he was obviously the older pro. He's frustrated at not playing as you would be at that time in your career, but on a personal level, he never changed. He was just one of life's good guys, a really, really genuine good guy, and he helped me a lot through my career. I say it as in learning and as a support when I was playing.
What's that like, that relationship there? Because I remember hearing Alan Shearer talking about cleaning players' boots and stuff when he was an apprentice at Southampton. I'm not sure how much it happens now, but how much did you learn as a young kid going through that?
It's like any walk of life. I think the life has changed in general. The political correctness of the world that we live in these days, that the kids can't clean boots or dressing rooms. My job was to clean 3 players' boots and the laundry. And we used to have to stay after the first team games, pick up the kit, do the showers and everything else. And it's a grounding for you. I think nowadays, kids, I think it's easy to say, but you get a lot quicker than you did before. We had to earn the right to go into the first team dressing room. You know, we were cleaning the dressing room. You didn't want to walk into the dressing room at the fear of the barrage of abuse that you'd get. Whereas nowadays, it seems towards the end of my career, you'd go into a first team dressing room and some of the young lads wouldn't even give you the time of day or say good morning to you. So in that aspect, it's definitely changed, but I appreciated and thoroughly enjoyed the grounding that I got.
It's interesting because a lot of players, you hear a lot of stories from Man United, how the players talk about that class of 92, for example, talk about how they were shaped by that group of professionals in the changing room. Is it a hindrance now that players aren't getting that grounding, aren't growing as strongly as they should be?
Do you know what? I don't know about that. It's difficult because now football clubs are run more, for the best word, a business. I mean, Manchester City, for example, they have a loan squad. They have a specific squad that will do a pre-season and then will be loaned out for that whole season. So football's changed over the years, and you look at the game now, the speed of the game, the cleverness of players, the ability of players. It's completely changed for the better. Yes, there is the old school, the hardline apprenticeship, your initiations, everything else that went on in football. Has it changed for the better? You look at the game now, you look at the Premier League, it probably has.
Just a word on Leeds. Looks like, for the first time in years, they could be launching a serious title challenge.
We've said that before. We've said that before.
What have you made of them, though, so far this season?
I've been very impressed with them. Very, very impressed with them. I think the manager's come in. He's come into a championship that he's obviously got no prior knowledge of, which everybody knows. It's documented. It's a very difficult league to come into. It's a 40-odd game season, which, for me, the only downside the manager's never experienced. And in his previous jobs, his teams have always tailed off in the last 2 or 3 months of the season. At the moment, from the outside looking in, he looks like he's got a small squad. I just hope they can get through January, February without injury, suspensions, and maintain where they are now. And we've got the best chance of going up than we've ever had.
And I'm keen to get your thoughts on Bailey Peacock-Farrell. I'm one of these geeks that I get alerts every day on pretty much every goalkeeper, and it's amazing the publicity that seems to follow him. He's obviously had his Northern Ireland call up as well and played a couple of games now. And it seems to be a bit up and down in terms of the feedback from Leeds supporters. But I look at his record, it's fantastic. When I've watched him play, his distribution looks very, very good. What have you made of Bailey Peacock-Farrell?
I was impressed with him because he's taken his chance the second time he's been given his chance, if you like. He was brought into the first team, and then he had to take a year or so out. You know, they brought in other goalkeepers, looked at other people, and he's been given a chance again. And they brought another goalkeeper in from Chelsea, and they didn't sign a clear number one. So I was pleased to see that they actually give him the chance and said, look, we've got two equal number ones, if you like. You can start the season. That it's yours to lose, if you like. And I think he's done really, really well this year. And I think you can see him growing in stature as well, just like you say, his performances, his distribution, but also his communication, the way that he handles himself on the pitch. You can see that he's growing amongst his peers in the dressing room just by the way that he is on the pitch. I think he's done very well this season.
Paul, you're part of an elite group of goalkeepers who have performed at both ends. You've scored, as have a few of our other guests. We've had Brad Friedel on. We've got Asmir Begovic coming on the show, who's also a member of that club. But you've gone one better because you've actually scored twice. Is that something you look back on with pride?
Yeah, of course it is. I'm a frustrated centre forward, as we all are. There's only one thing that stopped me being a centre forward. It's about 3 stone. Listen, the goal for Leeds was brilliant because it was a Roy the Rovers moment. We were 2-1 down, last minute of injury time or whatever, and went up the other end and meant it. Yeah. The one for Tottenham was obviously a lot more. It was just a lucky punt up pitch. It was a free kick, just launched into the opposition's half and got very, very lucky with the wind, the bounce, and everything else. But to experience scoring when you actually mean to score, it's something that not many goalkeepers will have the pleasure of doing.
Do you know what? Funnily enough, I was on the bench that game that you scored against Watford.
The Watford game?
Yeah, I was on the bench. So I remember I was sat in the change room afterwards and I was just... I mean, my heart sank for Ben. It's that horrible feeling when you see a mistake like that and when he's come in. But in fairness, Ben dealt with it very, very well. And at the time, if I remember rightly, you two were both in the England squad together. Did you give him a little bit of stick for it?
Do you know what? If I'd have meant it, I would have done. But no, I mean, I was close with Fuzzy at the time. And it was at the time I was getting, I was under a little bit of pressure with my England position. I wasn't playing the greatest at the time. Ben was on the top of his game, and there's a little bit of question about whether I'd still be England's number one, etc. And for me to score that goal, people went, "Oh, was it brilliant? Did you really enjoy it?" You can't really take enjoyment out of doing that to a fellow colleague, especially when it wasn't meant. And as you know, what a guy Ben is. Yeah. Great lad. And at the time, he was at the top of his game, and he's still doing it.
We had him on the show a couple of weeks ago, to be fair, and he's quite philosophical about it.
Yeah, go on. What did he say?
He just seems to think it's quite funny, doesn't he? He didn't
just
take
one
it
of those
too
things,
personally.
isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I think, and actually, this is. I want to talk a little bit about mindset because I do this with every single guest that we have. So the guys here always got to get on my case. But where I was quite interested with Ben, when Ben joined Watford, and he's very sort of happy-go-lucky. Obviously, takes his football very seriously, but he's very level-headed. And it seems like the more goalkeepers we're speaking to, we're seeing that where they don't get too carried away with the huge highs. But similarly, when you have the big lows, again, don't get too distraught about that. Would you say that you have a similar mentality?
That comes with time. I think as a youngster, when you first starting, you experience the highs and lows and you get carried away with it. But as you get older, you get more experienced, you learn to be more like that. And one thing that I've always said as I've got older, for a goalkeeper, you have to have a golfer's mentality. You can't live on your last shot, if you like, your last save or your last mistake. If you make a terrible mistake, you can't go trying to atone for that mistake in the game. You have to forget it, you have to carry on. And that's only something that comes with time as a goalkeeper. And it's very, very difficult to learn and take a step away from it when you're a young lad, as you probably know.
Robbo, there were the goals. There was also a penalty. You are our first and probably only keeper that's ever won a penalty for his side.
Oh, yes. Blackburn did as well, didn't they? Yeah. Went up for a header, got kicked in the head for a penalty.
Did you actually forget that momentarily then?
When you're talking about the goals, I got caught up in the goals rather than the
Assists.
You're without a doubt the biggest attacking threat of a goalkeeper that we've had on.
First time I've been called an attacking threat, but we haven't put it like that.
That's going in the Twitter bio.
We were losing. It was late on. It was a miserable day at Wigan. I think we were in dire trouble with Blackburn at the time as well, and we were desperately trying to get a result. I just ended up gone up for a header. I think I got kicked in the head.
That's probably why you forgot it, I guess. Kind of makes sense.
So obviously, Paul, you mentioned England a little bit earlier on. You first included in Peter Taylor's squad when he took temporary charge. You made your full international debut against Australia, which was also Wayne Rooney's debut. What's it like as a young keeper, a young pro, going into the England setup?
I was lucky because I was in the under-21s and I got called up to, well, not called up if you like, but brought into the full squad to train. So if we were away with the 21s, we'd have 2 or 3 days in the week where the so-called players that were looking to push on would get called up to be able to train with a full squad. So I'd had a little taste of it before I was actually called up. But when you look back, my debut was in that game at Upton Park when Sven kind of made a mockery of the game by making 11 changes at half-time. There was a lot of us that made our debuts at the time. But it was a generation that, we were ready to get our debuts, if you like, and you could see the future. But I think the way that it all came about, it was kind of overshadowed by the amount of changes that he'd made.
I'm glad you mentioned Sven, because we actually asked fans for questions before the show, and quite a lot of people messaged in asking about that England regime under Sven-Göran Eriksson. As you say, made a lot of changes. The 2006 World Cup, that was a hell of a team that England took out there. What are your memories of playing under Sven?
Sven was a very, very good man manager. He he dictated with respect, if you like. He treated you as adults and he expected the same respect back. You could see some games he'd come in at half time, he'd be frustrated, you could see his vent of frustration. And rather than come into the dressing room and offload and scream and shout at you, he'd take himself off, leave the players to talk amongst themselves, as a lot of the modern day managers do now that I've found. Take himself off to his own room for 5 or 10 minutes, and then he'd come back into the dressing room and he'd have something very constructive to say. It would be critical. It would be, he'd have the right thing to say, if you like, rather than just coming in and shooting from the hip like a lot of managers do. He would rule in a different way. You could see that he was angry. You could see he was fuming, but he'd take himself off. He'd calm himself down, come back in, complete composure, and he'd be able to deliver his message.
How does that compare to other England managers that you played under?
All the managers are very, very different. I'd say I think I spent the majority of my time for England under Sven. Other England managers had tough times of it. Certain managers I didn't get on with. Fabio, for example, that's when I retired. I always liked a personal approach as a manager, man management style, door open, any problems, come and see me. If I'm not playing, can I ask you why I'm not playing? Can you tell me what I need to do to play? Etc., etc. And he didn't have that personal approach. Sven was he was quiet and he was guarded, but he worked on a respect. And like you say, we had a group in 2006 that was expected to do far better than we actually did.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously one of the things that comes with England is that huge amount of pressure. But I'm glad you mentioned Capello, because it's something that I've heard talking to ex-pros before, and when I've interviewed people, pros don't seem to like Fabio Capello because he is very standoffish, he is very authoritarian. Do you think he was the wrong fit for England and for English players?
I think the thing with international management, the thing that a lot of people miss is that you're together as an international team for 4 or 5 days at maximum before a game. So you don't necessarily need the best coach in the world. What's the best coach in the world going to coach the best players in this country in 3 or 4 days? You need to manage players. You need to know how to get the best out of start with the 11 that you're going to send out, but you also need to keep the other 11 or 12 on side. You need to be tactically clever and aware of how to beat the team that you're playing against. And in 4 days, you're not going to coach the best players much that they don't already know. So I think that's where, you sometimes get caught up, we'll get the best coach in the world, we need this, we need that. For an international level, the key to international management is man management.
Was there that sense of expectation with that? I mean, because that's a team that had incredible talent. I mean, Ferdinand Terry, of course, Gary Neville was there, David Beckham, Lampard, Gerrard, Rooney, the list goes on. Was there a real sense of expectation for you guys going out there in 2006?
course there was. I mean, you look back, we'd won it before we'd even left the shores. You look at the players that we've got, and on paper, we'd rival any team in the world at the time. And given our day, we slowly improved through the tournament. I don't for 1 minute think that we achieved the expectation or what we could have possibly achieved. But on paper, we had a strong enough team to compete with anybody. Did we underachieve? Yes, we definitely underachieved. Did we have players playing in different positions where we were players picked on their ability, their reputation, or was it a team that was cohesive? There's a lot of questions to be asked. I mean, I did a thing in the media at work recently. We did a thing about Wayne Rooney and everything that he achieved in his career, his medals, his Premier League titles, everything else that he's won. And the question was put to me, did he underachieve at international level? And I said he didn't underachieve at international level. The team that he was in underachieved. He could do no more on a personal level. The team that we were in, the squad that we had, underachieved.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And it's amazing, I suppose. It's all part of the path to where we are now and the re-evaluation of the England team. One of the high points, of course, for you as an England player, 6 straight clean sheets. You very nearly equalled Gordon Banks' record. Were you aware of that at the time? Is that something you look back on afterwards?
It's probably something you look back on afterwards, actually. Obviously, you're aware of things at the time because as my career went on, the social media, the media, the intensity, it gets more and more. But probably wasn't aware of such a record, the level of the record at the time.
When you look back on it, of course, because where the record wasn't achieved was conceding against Croatia, a pass back from Gary Neville. Did you kind of say to him afterwards, "Come on, mate, I was going for Gordon Banks' record there. What are you doing?"
Do you know what? Probably at that time, that was probably the lowest point in my career. That's probably the last thing I thought about asking Nev at the time. Probably why didn't you pass it back outside the post like you taught as a kid? But no, do you know what? It's just one of them things. If exactly the same thing happened to probably 9, 10 out of 10 goalkeepers today, you have a swing at the ball, and if it's not there, you can't kick it. It was just a physical impossibility. I'd try and do exactly the same thing now. It was just one of them things. But no, at the time, the record didn't come into my head.
Yeah, well, no, I wanted to speak to you about this because I remember I got in a few arguments myself at the time with people because it's, I remember reading somewhere like a Paul Robinson error, and it's just like there is no error there. There's something that's happened that's completely out of your control. You've done exactly the right thing that you would ordinarily do with a pass back that you need a big clearance on, and it's just one of those things. It's just a freak incident.
It just looks bad though, doesn't it? That's the thing. You watch it on telly, it just looks like, oh wow, what's happened there? That's awful. Why has he done that?
But how did you
say?
How did you deal with that though? Because I think I found that really difficult. If I'm reading things in the paper and obviously I don't know if you were reading the papers at the time or if you hear that someone has associated any blame towards you for that. Did you not find that frustrating? Was that quite difficult to get through?
It was tough for me for a long time after that because of the scrutiny and the actual intensity of the criticism that you get. And I wasn't ready for it because, as you say, you can rationalise it in your head. You think, right, well, what have I done? What happened? That happened. I did exactly the same. Right, it wasn't that bad. Watch it as a football fan, as a supporter, looking at it, it's like, wow, that looks horrific. And then every ground you go to, the weekend after, any time a ball comes near you, it's whoa, waiting for it to come back. And then you go and pick the ball up from behind the goal, somebody says something, and it just escalates. And you know as well as anybody, goalkeeping is confidence. As soon as your confidence takes a knock or a hit, you're in trouble. And then week after week after week, if you're getting that from the fans behind you, from the crowd, it plays on you. And I'm not going to lie, it affected me for a good 6 months afterwards.
Well, you did stay in the international reckoning after that, but it then became a case of the England goalkeeping setup was continually chopping and changing. You had David James, you had Rob Green, Scott Carson, there was Ben Foster, yourself, and obviously Joe Hart then came into the picture. It was constantly changing. You eventually said when you retired from England that you were frustrated by being a number 3 and a number 4. Have you always felt like that? Do you still feel like that now?
I don't regret retiring for 1 minute whatsoever. People say you should always make yourself available to your country, etc., etc. I agree with that wholeheartedly. But for me at the time in my career, what I'd experienced at international level and the manager at the time, it was a closed door, it was a closed book. And for me, I saw more benefit of training with my club, having a few days off, having an international break, than travelling around Europe, training all the time, and then sitting in the stands in my suit watching a game that I thought I should have been playing in. So for me, it was difficult, but it was a decision that I undertook, and it was a brave decision. It was just, you know what, I'm not enjoying this. This isn't for me. I'd rather do something else, and I stand by the decision. Even today, I'm happy with what I did.
In an England shirt as well, just have to mention, we talked about 2006. You created a bit of history in Frankfurt when you smashed the ball into the screen. How on earth did you manage that?
Do you know what? Even people to this day just went, "Oh, you must have had a bet on that." And it was actually quite funny because the night before it, we were all doing it. Obviously, we trained at the stadiums the night before the game. And after training had finished, we're all there. We've got balls underneath it. We're trying to volley the ball up. And nobody could get anywhere near it. So I don't know what it was, whether it was just adrenaline, the spur of the moment. But I think we were 1-0 up with about 15 minutes to go. And we were kind of holding on for the game. So I thought, you know, this is going as high and as far as I possibly can. And if I'd have had the foresight to have had a bet on it, I'd have been a very richer man.
Paul, we had Brad Friedel on a couple of weeks ago, obviously former Blackburn keeper. And he was talking about the biggest derbies he'd played in. And he put up there with Galatasaray, Fenerbahce, Blackburn, Burnley. Now, you're a brave man because you played for both clubs. I mean, we're not quite talking Figo at the Nou Camp and a pig's head being thrown onto the pitch, but it's definitely quite a lively one, isn't it? How was that going to Burnley after being at Blackburn?
It's a very, very passionate derby. Two very proud, old-fashioned football clubs who've got a history dating back many years, and they've got a very, very intense rivalry. People talk about it in the football world, but until you've actually attended one of the games, you know, you don't understand how much they really do dislike one another. When I signed for Blackburn, I was asked, you know, have you ever played in a local derby, or have you played in big games? So, like, obviously the North London derby, England, Argentina, etc. No, nothing like Blackburn, Burnley. This is the biggest you've ever played in. So when I was at Blackburn, I played in it a couple of times, and you could see what it meant to the people. But for me to I was lucky to go to Burnley when my career had finished. I had a year or so out, and then got the chance to go back to Burnley. And there was no kind of, right, I'm going to Burnley, Blackburn's arch rivals. It was just an opportunity that was too good to turn down for me.
Looking at the lists of the managers that you've played under, it's a pretty incredible list. Terry Venables, Paul Ince.
I've got a few sacked.
You and me both.
But you've got Terry Venables, Paul Ince, Sam Allardyce, Sven-Goran Eriksson, as we said, Fabio Capello, Martin Jol, Juan de Ramos. Do you kind of take a little bit from every single manager you play under?
You have to as a player. You do that. I'm doing my coaching badges at the moment with the intention of maybe one day going into management, and people say, you know, why would you do that? Something that has always intrigued me, and working with the managers that I've worked with, I can take so much good and so much bad, and I know how I felt as a player and how I was treated and how I would like to be treated and how I wouldn't like to be treated. The one thing that I've learned from every single manager and players, as one thing you want as a player, is honesty. If you're not going to play, tell me why, tell me what I have to do to play. If I am going to play, tell me what you want from me, etc. As a manager, you have to be honest with your players, but at the same time, you have to keep them all on side. But as you say, I worked with a lot of managers, learned a lot of good things from different people.
Who was your favourite manager to play under?
For me, Sam. Big Sam was the best for me. He was able to get the best out of me. As I say, man management-wise, he was excellent. He may not have been the best coach on a training ground Monday to Friday, but he could set a team up, tactically clever, and he was honest with you, and he was the best man manager and the best motivator that I've ever worked with. And to be fair, up there with him is Sean Dyche at Burnley. I learnt a lot from him in the 18 months that I was there. He's a very, very clever manager, very knowledgeable manager, as is Martin Jol.
I've got to ask you about Dyche quickly, because he was in the same Watford team as me. In fact, he got sent off on my debut back in the day. Sure does. And he's one of the most interesting characters I've ever come across in the world of football. But obviously, I don't know if you knew him as a player. Like, how is he as a manager? What's his sort of style?
His way.
His way or no way?
It's his way, yeah. He's got very, very clear ideas of what he wants, how he wants to do things. He's got a very good staff around him. He's hugely honest with you. He has structure. He's got a setup. And probably everything that he was as a player, he gives as a manager. Just the way that, what impressed me is the way that he can command a room we'd go in and we'd have videos, we'd have team talks. There's certain managers, you'd go in, the room would be warm, you'd be sat at the back, you'd be kind of nodding off, watching a video, kind of half listening. He commanded you the whole time. Every time you were in a room with him, whether you believed in what he was saying or not, after 5 minutes of listening to him, you believed him.
Paul, what must have been one of the lowest points of your career? You had a long spell out of the game towards the tail end of your career, more than a year without a game, due to something called a venous thromboembolism, VTE. I saw you tweeted Trevor Carson as well, the Motherwell keeper, who's suffering from the same thing. Can you tell us a little bit about that time?
Yeah, he's just got a blood clot on his shoulder, which is unfortunate for him. I was struggling at the time with a back problem. Well, it was sciatica, basically. I got no back pain whatsoever, but all the pain went down my left bum cheek, all down my left leg, and through my hamstring. And at the time, I wasn't being played at Blackburn for whatever reason, so I decided to have the operation on my back, where I had a micro discectomy, basically half the disc removed, so it wasn't touching my sciatic nerve. I was very unfortunate. The week after the operation, I started coughing up blood. Again, long story short, I went to the hospital. They sent me home, said it's fine, it's just where they've had the tubes down your throat for the operation. The next day, I was in a lot of pain, chest, rushed into hospital, and they said I got a blood clot in my lung. So then that was a case of blood thinning quickly, really, for the next 2 or 3 days, trying to thin the blood, remove the clot, and then 6 months on warfarin. I was very, very lucky at the time that the clot stopped where it had in the bottom of my lung rather than at the top of my lung, because I think that could have been me done. Wow. But I lost half my lung power on the left-hand side. That infarcted, and kind of like it went missing, if you like. Yeah. So it was a long time after that. It was a long period of recovery, probably about 3 or 4 months, till I could actually feel normal and human again. But then after that time, the recommended dose of warfarin is 6 months. And because of what I did and my profession, there's nobody I could find that would take me off warfarin sooner than the 6 months, even though I felt fine and ready to go. So basically, it's a blood thinner where if you knock yourself, you bruise yourself. If you cut yourself, you bleed excessively. So I was in a difficult situation. So all in all, it probably took me about a year to get back to anything like normal.
Wow. It obviously included a lot of downtime for you. Like Joe said, you were out of the game for about a year. I read somewhere that you took up Italian. Is that correct?
I read that as well. Absolute load of rubbish.
Is it complete rubbish?
I read it on Wikipedia. Honestly, this is the perfect example of why you shouldn't believe what you read on the internet. I said I went to some university in Milan somewhere. I can't even order a pizza, never mind speak Italian. Absolute load of rubbish.
I have to say, I did think it was quite strange. I actually followed that Wikipedia link, and it led to an article that didn't include Italian at all. So I'm glad you've.
Do you know what I was expecting there when you asked that?
I want a local restaurant.
Yeah. Do you know what I was expecting when he asked that question? I thought you were going to respond in like some fluent Italian.
Yeah, me too.
No, I can categorically confirm that is a complete load of rubbish.
Oh dear.
Robbo, you said at the start of the season, I was reading an article that you put out. You said that David De Gea would still be your number one goalkeeper for the campaign. Do you still maintain that view? And in addition, your thoughts on Alisson, on Kepa, and also Hugo Lloris, I suppose, who's had a bit of an on-off campaign, you could say, this season.
I think this is the first season that the end of the last season, if you like, we had a slight dip in his form and questions were asked. And then he went and won the World Cup. He's come back this year, and he's a huge integral part of Tottenham, hence the reason he's the captain. I think he lacks somebody to challenge him. I think he's maybe too comfortable there. He's number one, clearly number one. Even if he has 2 or 3 in different games, I don't think what they've got is good enough to challenge him to be number one. De Gea is absolutely outstanding. Saw him last week in the Champions League, made the save of the season. Yeah. He's saved Manchester United so many times, and he's earned them so many points. Ederson at City, he impresses me hugely. He's yet to be tested, playing behind a brilliant team, but his footwork and his distribution, it's been well documented. But if they win the league at a canter like it looks like they may do, I'd like to see him play centre midfield for the last game of the season. Alisson, I think Liverpool desperately needed one. They had 2 good goalkeepers, but I don't think they had a top goalkeeper, which other clubs at that level had. They needed to change. I'll reserve my judgment on him, but I like what I've seen so far. The only thing that worries me was Wojciech Szczesny kept him out of the team at Roma for a season, and he only played 38 games at Roma before they paid a lot of money for him. But there's potential there, and I like what I've seen.
Robbo, we like to finish every week with something called the locker room. It's an insight into the world of a professional footballer from your perspective. It's just a few quick-fire questions. First up, who would you say your toughest opponent you faced was?
Without a shadow of a doubt, Thierry Henry. No matter who I played for, he'd score 4.
Do you know what the thing about Henry? Because I was talking to someone about this with Arjen Robben. So Arjen Robben does this thing where he cuts in from the right wing and he bends it into the far corner with his left foot. He does it every time. Everyone knows what he's going to do.
You know what he's going to do, yeah. And he did it in the Champions League the other week for Bayern Munich. Even now, cuts in off the right wing, left foot. You know exactly what he's going to do, but he's done it 3 times in the same game.
And
Henry was the same.
The amount of times I watched Thierry Henry cut in against Spurs onto his right and bend it in the far corner, and you knew what he was going to do, but you just can't stop a play like
rub
that.
It in. I know.
It still hurts, Robbo. It still hurts. But you can't stop a player like that, can you?
Somebody of his quality, he could run and he could hit it without breaking stride, and he is without doubt he was my nemesis. No matter who I played for, he would always score.
Even if you know what he's going to do, Robbo, so you know that he's going to bend it into that far corner, why is it that goalkeepers continue to concede those goals if they know what a player's going to do?
If I knew that, I'd be the best goalkeeper coach in the world, wouldn't I?
Do you know what? It's actually, I'll just touch on that because I suppose it reminds me of like a free kick where, 9 times out of 10, Beckham will go up over the wall and into that corner. But the second you guess and you start to maybe go towards that side,
it goes the other way.
It goes the other way. And that's where the lights...
The amount of times now you do the analysis and you look at goalkeepers and the way that players can hit a ball now and the speed that balls travel, if they take even just their body weight over to one side, it's in the other corner before they can even move.
Yeah, no, spot on. Next question, your greatest save?
We've talked about your greatest goals.
Yeah.
So.
Probably, I had a very, very good game for Leeds when I was a youngster against Barcelona in the Champions League, which probably set the tone for my career. Like that gave me the starting point. So probably one of the saves in the game against Barcelona when I was young.
Yeah, no, I remember that game well.
Is there any particular teammate or moment with a teammate that you look back on that was particularly funny?
Oh yeah, there's a lot, but you can't talk about them.
Oh, don't worry. This is an over 18s post watershed podcast, so you can go for it.
Let's just say I was party to and party of a lot of dressing room pranks that were very, very funny.
What club was the worst or the best for that?
Well, Leeds and Tottenham, following Jonathan Woodgate around.
Oh, I've heard things. I have heard things. Okay.
Yeah. Woody's a really nice lad. Wrong planet.
How would you sum up being a goalkeeper in one sentence?
Lonely.
Yeah.
I think that's perfect. I think that's my favourite answer that we've had.
In fact, I do have one more, and I like to ask this. We have a lot of young listeners that do listen in, obviously a lot of aspiring goalkeepers that want to make it to the pros. What advice would you give, given your experience on what it takes to become a top-level pro goalkeeper?
Probably training, something that I learned later in my career, getting small margins. I mean, the game nowadays with sports scientists and everything else has evolved so much. But you leave the training ground and you think you've done enough, or you can't be bothered to do gym that day, or you can't be bothered to, do a recovery session or whatever else. There's always something that you can do. So long as you leave the training ground and when you sat in your car and you're going home, I've done more than enough today, or I've done everything that I possibly could. How many times through your whole career have you said that, or have you just wanted to get off?
Do you have any regrets?
Do I have regrets? No, not really. I thoroughly enjoyed my career. Thoroughly enjoyed everything. Could I have done more? Could I have trained harder? Could I have put more out of myself? Potentially at times. But no, I don't have any regrets at all.
There's only one, though. When you won that penalty against Wigan, you shouldn't have let Yakubu take it. You should have taken it yourself.
Yeah, but then I'd looked a clown if I'd have missed it, wouldn't I? Blood pouring out my head. Hero, thinking he can take the penalty as well. No, I looked a right clown, wouldn't I?
Paul Robinson, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks, guys. No problem.